Have you ever felt that tension between what you need, maybe what your local community prioritizes, and then, the grander goals of the entire nation, that constant push and pull
Yeah,
between individual interests and the bigger picture? It's something we still see all the time, right?
Definitely. It's a fundamental tension in almost any large, diverse group.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a period of American history where this exact tension was absolutely central, like baked into the very idea of building the nation. We're looking at the early republic, roughly from 1800 to 1848. It was a time when the concept of a truly unified United States was, well, constantly being tested, often under immense pressure. We've got some really insightful excerpts here drawn from regionalism, economy, and early republic strife. And our mission really is to understand just how deeply these regional interests, these very localized priorities shaped federal power and the whole political landscape back then.
Yeah, and what becomes immediately clear from these sources is how these early, often quite fiery debates weren't just about specific policies. They were, in a way, debates about what America was going to be. They really set the stage for so much of the nation's future, highlighting this fundamental struggle that honestly still resonates, that clash between local priorities tied to economics and social ways of life, and that sort of aspirational ideal of national unity.
That's a really important distinction. It makes you wonder then, how did these different parts of the country actually, fight for their corner? And what did that mean for the young United States for its cohesion?
How did it all hang together, or not hang together sometimes?
Exactly. Let's try and unpack it. So the sources make it pretty clear that in this era, regional interests often didn't just compete with national concerns. They flat out trumped them a lot of the time. Political leaders weren't necessarily thinking national good first. They were often prioritizing what tangibly benefited their specific economies, their social structures, their people back home.
Was that a conscious choice, though, or just the reality?
That's a good question, I think.
Well, it was undeniably a reality, right? And a powerful one. If you think about it, the United States back then was less a single entity and more like a collection of really distinct zones.
yeah.
The agrarian South, the more mercantile North, the expanding West. They all had vastly different needs, different priorities.
Totally different world, almost.
Pretty much. So whenever federal power or economic policy came up, each section just naturally saw those actions through the lens of how does this help us or how does this hurt us?
Yeah.
And that explains why debates over things that might seem straightforward now became so incredibly intense, often like threatening the Union intense.
And nowhere is that clearer, I think, than with the War of 1812. You'd imagine a war, right? A fight against a common enemy, Great Britain. That should be the ultimate unifier. You expect everyone to rally around the flag. But the reality, much more divided.
Yeah, it really wasn't that simple. The South and the West, for instance, they were actually strong supporters of the war. They saw it partly as defending national honor, against the British impressing sailors and stuff, but also, crucially, they saw opportunities. Expansion into Canada, into Spanish Florida, pushing back against Native American confederacies often backed by the British. For them, it was about security, land, asserting American power.
Manifest destiny starting to bubble up even then.
Kind of, yeah. But then you look at New England. Totally a different story. Their whole economy was built on shipping, on trade, and a lot of that trade was with Great Britain. So for them, this war wasn't just an inconvenience. It felt like an existential threat.
Their livelihoods were basically collapsing.
Absolutely destroyed by the conflict, the embargoes. Imagine the chaos, the economic ruin hitting those port towns. Their discontent got so bad, it led to the Hartford Convention in 1814. You had Federalist delegates from New England states meeting openly airing grievances.
And even talking about secession, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Floating the idea of actually seceding from the Union. I mean, this wasn't just political disagreement anymore. These were communities seriously thinking about breaking away from the nation they'd only just helped create. It's pretty staggering.
It really forces you to ask how fundamental, how existential did those regional concerns have to be to overshadow even a national war effort? For New England, trade was everything. Disrupting it meant poverty, unrest, the potential collapse of their way of life. For the South and West, it was land, security, expansion, very different priorities.
It really highlights how fragile that sense of national cohesion was, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So the war, even though America technically won and there was the surge of nationalism afterwards, it actually kind of reinforced how deeply embedded these competing priorities were. maybe irreconcilably so.
And the war didn't just expose political cracks. It glaringly revealed how undeveloped the nation's economic infrastructure was. I mean, imagine trying to move troops or supplies from, say, Virginia up towards Canada, or just getting farm goods from Ohio to markets in New York.
Nightmare logistics.
Totally. The poor transportation systems mentioned in the sources weren't just inconvenient, they were crippling. Roads were often just muddy tracks, canals were rare.
River travel was slow, seasonal.
Right. So markets were fragmented. You couldn't really have a truly national economy functioning smoothly, especially not one capable of supporting a big war effort.
And add to that, the first national bank's charter had expired, so you had this mess of state currencies, unreliable credit.
Yeah, just chaos. It practically screamed for some kind of national solution. Which brings us to Henry Clay. He saw these weaknesses, these huge gaps, and proposed his really ambitious American system, a big vision to try and unify and strengthen the national economy. The sources helpfully give us that acronym, BIT, to remember the three main parts.
Right, BIT. Makes it easier to track.
So the B was for the Second Bank of the United States. Before this, like you said, doing business across state lines was a nightmare. Different currencies, fluctuating values. The idea here was to centralize things. Create a stable national currency, regulate the state banks, provide reliable credit everywhere, basically build the financial backbone for a unified economy.
Make commerce actually work on a national scale.
Exactly. Then OCM federally funded internal improvements. This is the infrastructure part. Big investments in roads, canals.
The stuff that connects the country.
Precisely. Making it easier, cheaper to move goods. Think about a farmer way out west getting their crops to an East Coast port. This could be revolutionary for them. Shrink distances, boost trade.
Huge potential benefits, at least on paper.
And finally, TQ was for federal tariffs, taxes on imported goods. The main goal here was protectionist. Make foreign goods more expensive to help America's own young manufacturing industries, mostly in the North, compete. Build up domestic production, rely less on Europe.
Okay, so bank, internal improvements, tariffs. BIT. Seems logical, right? Aimed at national strength. But, and this is crucial, while parts like the tariffs and the bank did get enacted, Presidents Madison and Monroe actually pushed back hard against federal funding for those internal improvements, the roads and canals.
Oh, right. Why was that?
Well, partly on constitutional grounds, they argued it was an overreach of federal power, but also pragmatically, they saw it disadvantaging the agricultural South. They worried it would mainly benefit the North and West, while the South would end up paying taxes for projects that didn't directly help their plantation economy nearly as much.
So even policies explicitly designed for national unity immediately got viewed through that regional lens. Who wins, who loses?
Exactly. It wasn't just about the national good in theory, it was about the practical impact on their region.
And we see that again really intensely with the tariff fights, like the Compromise Tariff of 1833. That came about because of massive Southern opposition to an earlier tariff they called the Tariff of Abominations.
Yeah, 1828. South Carolina especially was furious.
They felt these high tariffs were just protecting Northern factories at the direct expense of Southern farmers. They had to pay more for manufactured goods, and their cotton exports sometimes faced retaliation from Europe.
It nearly led to a crisis, the nullification crisis, really highlighted that fundamental economic split. North is industry, South is agriculture built on enslaved labor. These weren't just different economies, they felt like opposing ways of life.
But if anything pushed these regional tensions even further, really ratcheted things up, it was westward expansion.
Always expansion.
Yeah, you have this rapidly growing population, transportation getting slightly better, and just the powerful lure of cheap land out west. Americans were pouring into new territories. And as the nation expanded, the big question became unavoidable. What kind of society grows in these new lands? Free or slave? That became the flashpoint.
And what's really striking here is how slavery, which had been, this uneasy background compromise since the founding, it just exploded onto center stage with Missouri's application for statehood in 1819. This wasn't just adding another star to the flag. It fundamentally challenged the political balance of power that had been so carefully, almost nervously, maintained.
And that balance was incredibly delicate, wasn't it? At that exact moment, it was perfectly even in the Senate. 11 free states, 11 slave states.
There's a lot of potential.
Exactly. And that parity was absolutely critical for the southern states. It gave them a veto, essentially, over any federal laws that might hurt their interests, especially slavery. Remember, the North already had a majority in the House of Representatives because of its larger population. So the Senate was the South's firewall.
Right. So if Missouri came in as a slave state, it wouldn't just be 12-11. It would tip that Senate balance decisively towards the South. Northerners feared that would entrench slavery permanently.
And the question hanging over everything was, how does the political landscape, maybe the future of the country, shift if one side gets that permanent upper hand in the Senate?
Yeah, the prospect terrified the North. But for the South, keeping that balance or even gaining an edge felt essential for protecting their entire economic and social system. It was fundamental.
This tension is what led to the Tallmadge Amendment. It was proposed by James Tallmadge, a congressman from New York. He basically tried to attach conditions to Missouri's statehood, stop importing enslaved people into Missouri, and free the children of those already enslaved there once they reached age 25.
So a gradual emancipation plan for Missouri.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Effectively banning slavery there over time.
Northerners mostly backed this. They saw it as, well, both morally right and politically necessary to stop slavery's spread. But Southerners, they saw it as an absolute existential threat, not just about Missouri, not just about political power.
But like the first step towards ending slavery everywhere.
Exactly. A dangerous precedent that could unravel their whole society. The vote on Tallmadge's amendment just split right down the middle, sectionally, passed the House, failed the Senate.
And the nation felt like it was right on the edge again. Some Southerners were openly threatening secession again.
The rhetoric was incredibly heated.
So, with tensions just dangerously high, the Union genuinely felt like it could break apart right there. And this is where Henry Clay steps back in,
The great compromiser.
earning that title again.
Huh.
He worked like crazy to broker what became the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The goal was simple: lower the temperature, save the Union.
Pull things back from the brink.
So, the compromise had a few key pieces designed to give something to both sides. First, Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. That satisfied the South's immediate demand.
Okay, so the South gets Missouri.
Right. But to keep that crucial Senate balance, a new state, Maine, which had been part of Massachusetts, would be admitted at the same time as a free state. So back to 1212, equilibrium restored.
Clever balancing act.
And then, the really crucial part for the future. They drew a line on the map. The 36-degree, 30-minute latitude line. This became the boundary. The deal was, any future territories north of this line, from the Louisiana Purchase land, would enter as free states, except Missouri itself, obviously. Anything south of the line could potentially enter as slave states.
So it seemed like a solution, right? A rule for the future. Avoid this same fight every single time.
That was the hope. Offer a clear path, reduce future conflict.
But if we step back and look at the bigger picture, while the compromise did calm things down temporarily, and it did maintain that numerical balance, it didn't actually solve the underlying conflict over slavery, did it?
Not at all.
It was fundamentally a temporary truce, a political bandage on a really deep, festering wound. That 36-degree, 30-minute line wasn't a symbol of unity. It became a stark geographic marker of the nation's deepest division. The fundamental disagreement over slavery just kept simmering, getting worse, becoming more irreconcilable, and ultimately it just set the stage for the even bigger crises that finally tore the nation apart 40 years later. It just kicked the can down the road.
So, thinking about all this, what does it really mean for us today? This whole deep dive into the early republic, it just underscores so clearly how deeply intertwined everything was. Economic interests, political power, social structures like slavery, all constantly batting against this idea of a single unified national identity. It wasn't just abstract politics. It felt like survival for different regions.
Yeah, and what's really striking is how those early compromises, like the Missouri Compromise, while they did prevent an early breakup of the Union, they ultimately just highlighted the differences, the things that couldn't really be reconciled. It's a reminder, I think, that unity is often pretty fragile. Often it's a negotiated state built on temporary deals and managed balances rather than a true meeting of minds on fundamental issues.
So, as you think about this, maybe consider how similar dynamics still play out today. Where local or regional interests clash hard with national policy, where different economic systems create social divides, or where deeply held beliefs just seem completely at odds. How do societies actually reconcile those kinds of profound differences? And is compromise always just buying time? Or can it genuinely forge something lasting, something to definitely ponder?